Okay, we're in the middle of the 10th chapter, or I should say the beginning of the 10th chapter of Pesachim, which describes the Seder. We closed yesterday on the first cup, Mazgulo Kos Rishon. They mixed him the first cup. There's a question about whether we bless first over the day and then over the wine, or vice versa. And then we really get into the Seder. And what is fascinating about this chapter of the Mishnah is that we get in to a Seder we recognize as our Seder today. And furthermore, we recognize that this Seder that we see in the Mishnah, which is the same as our Seder today, was actually describing the Seder that they carried out at the time of the Beit Mikdash. And we'll see that, by the way, in the third Mishnah, but at the end of the third Mishnah. But let's just start very briefly, and then we'll see. Hevi'u lefanav, they bring before him. Now, this is very puzzling, and both the printed text and the Kalfa manuscript agree with this reading. Hevi'u lefanav, they bring before him. Nobody knows what they bring before him, or at least the Gemara supposes perhaps it's the Seder table, perhaps it's the vegetables. We can speculate. They bring something before him anyway. It's probably something to do with food. Hevi'u lefanav. Mutabel b'chazeret, he dips in lettuce. That's very odd. We think about dipping in something else, but we're explicitly, the Mishnah says he dips in the lettuce. Maybe this means he dips with the lettuce. That's probably the right way of putting it, because we know there are going to be two dippings. Maybe let's translate it that way. He dips with the lettuce. Mutabel b'chazeret. Until he reaches the appetizer that precedes the bread. So this seems to run all the way through the carapace that we eat before the matzah. Hevi'u lefanav matzah v'chazeret v'charoset. So now we're going to say explicitly what they bring, right? They bring the matzah. Hevi'u lefanav matzah v'chazeret v'charoset. They bring before him matzah and lettuce and charoset. Look, they're even, we think about the charoset as something nice that is made today just to make the bitter herb a little bit less bitter. But they had charoset in the time of the Mishnah. They had charoset. Ushnei tavshilin, and they bring two dishes. Well, afal pi she'ein charoset mitzvah. So already in the Mishnah, there's a question as maybe the charoset is just for fun. Maybe it's not a mitzvah. Rabbi Eliezer, but Rabbi Tzadok Omer mitzvah. Rabbi Eliezer, either in the name of Rabbi Tzadok or son of Rabbi Tzadok, says it is a mitzvah. So he's saying not only do we have charoset in the time of the Mishnah, but it's a mitzvah. And of course, that's the second dipping. We're going to dip the maror in the charoset, just as we're going to dip the lettuce that we started off with in whatever we're going to dip it in vinegar or salt water or whatever. What are these shnei tavshilin? What are the two dishes? Well, let's not forget that we got two sacrifices. We're going to figure later on in the chapter tomorrow or the next day, we'll get onto the brachot that we say before eating the two sacrifices. But there are two cooked dishes. There's the Pesach sacrifice, and there's the Haggadah. The Pesach sacrifice is special for Pesach, and the Haggadah is an offering that we can bring on any festival. So we have two lumps of meat, and this is probably what Shnei Tavshilin refers to. And now I think we have the shank bone and the boiled egg to remind us that there were once two lumps of meat on the Seder table. And Uva Mikdash Mav'im Lefanav Gufo Shel Pasach. And in the temple, they bring before him the body of the Pesach. So this Mishnah is clearly being written in the time of the time of the Mikdash. So maybe the Shnei Tavshilin here are not the Pesach and maybe the Shnei Tavshilin are reminiscent of the Pesach and the Haggadah rather than being the Pesach and the Haggadah itself. What's going to happen next? Mazgulo kos sheni, they mix the second cup. V'chan haben shoel. And here the son is going to ask, or the daughter, the child. Here the child's going to ask. Ve'im ein dat baben, if the child doesn't have knowledge, aviv mulamdo, his father teaches him. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halaylot. How is this night different from all other nights? I'm not sure whether this should be pointed with a question mark or with an exclamation mark. It could be ma nishtana, like ma nora hamakom hazeh. How different this is. Or it could be a question. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halaylot. How is this night different from all other nights? We can read the Mishnah either way, but again, it's fascinating that we can see this Mishnah absolutely in our Haggadah. And then we have the 4 questions. You'll notice, by the way, that these 4 questions in the Haggadah are in a different order from the order in which they are in the 4 questions in our Haggadah are different questions, and they are in a different order. Let's have a look at the Mishnah. On all other nights, we don't even dip once. This night, tonight, we dip twice. On all other nights, we eat chametz and matzah. Tonight, only matzah. You can hear, by the way, the poetry in the Mishnah, and there is poetry in the Haggadah, but often when we read the Haggadah, we don't recognize that poetry comes from the Mishnah. We've seen already that the Mishnah likes to use poetic structures. It likes to use repetition and alliteration, and it's doing this at this time. And it's going to carry on. On all other nights, we eat other vegetables. Tonight, only bitter herbs. And then finally, and this is the one that we don't ask nowadays. We haven't asked since the temple's been destroyed. On all other nights, we eat meat. We can eat meat which is roasted, boiled, or cooked. Tonight is only roasted. So those are the 4 questions of the Mishnah. Of course, today we asked a question about reclining. Maybe it was obvious in the time of the Mishnah that they reclined, because we're living in Roman times, right? In the Mishnah, everybody reclined. Maybe the question about reclining was put in order to balance out the question about roast, which of course is taken out, which is not relevant anymore. And according to the intellect of the son, does the father instruct him? We begin with shame and end with praise. That shame might have been the original idolatry, or it might have been the slavery in Egypt. That's the dispute between Rav and Shmuel in the Haggadah. And there are, if you like, there are 2 answers in the Haggadah, one from Rav and one from Shmuel, one beginning with slavery and the other beginning with idolatry. We're going to end with Hallel. V'doresh me'arami ovedavi ad sheigmor kol haparsha chula. And we're going to drush. I've translated here as interpret. We're going to drush. We're going to interpret from my father was a wandering Aramean until we complete the whole section. We mentioned yesterday, by the way, that the Haggadah is full of 4s, and for every 4 there's a hidden 5. So we've seen, for example, that there are 4 questions, but actually there's a 5th question. And you'll notice I've just brought you the verses from Arami Oved Avi. This is the declaration over the first fruits, which everybody would say when they brought their first fruits to Jerusalem. So this, you might say, by the way, this is the only prayer which is explicitly written out in Tanakh. You know, Shema is there in Tanakh, but there's the Torah doesn't explicitly say, look, you know, recite these words, but it does say ve'anita ve'amarta. When you bring the first fruits, you have to say this recitation, ve'anita ve'amarta lifnei Hashem Elohecha, and then it goes on Arami Oved Avi. And this is the main part of the Haggadah, of the drush of the Haggadah. And again, you will notice that there are 4 verses. The Haggadah drush is 4 verses, but just as there's a 5th promise, Veheviti etchem haaretz, there's a 5th verse too. At the end of these 4 verses, the he brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing in milk and honey. So we have another example of 4 with a hidden 5. And then Rabban Gamliel is going to say, you can feel we're shooting through the Mishnah here. We're shooting through the Haggadah here. The Mishnah deals with it very compactly. The Haggadah explains it at greater length. Rabban Gamliel haya omer kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu befesach lo yatzai dechovato. Rabban Gamliel says that you have to mention 3 things on Pesach to fulfill your obligation. Ve'elu hen Pesach matzah u'maror. These are them, the Pesach, the matzah, and the maror. The Pesach, because the Pesach al shum she Pesach hamakom al batei avotenu mitzrayim, because the Pesach, because he, which translated here as the omnipresent, he passed over hamakom, the place, passed over the houses of our fathers in Egypt. Matzah al shum shenigalu, the matzah, because of our fathers were redeemed. This is a very short version of the Mishnah. In Kaufman, and Kaufman, I'm just looking at this very carefully. Kaufman doesn't mention I don't think Kaufman mentions the bitter herbs. That's very interesting. He doesn't mention the bitter herbs. He cuts it out. That's really, I think. No. I've cut it out. I've edited. I've edited out. And the Mururim al shum shimaru hamitzrim et chaye avutenu b'mitzrayim. And the Mururim and the bitter herbs, because the Egyptians bittered our life in the land of Egypt. He has that before the matzah. And therefore, it's our duty, lefichach, anachu chayvim lehodot lahalel l'shabech l'fa'el l'romam l'hader l'varech la'aleh u'lekales l'mish asa la'avotenu ve'lanu et kol hanisim ha'elu hotzianu mi'avdut l'cherut mi'agon l'simcha me'ever liyom tov u'me'afela l'or gadol mi'shibud li'gula v'nomar l'fanav hallelujah. This is the beginning of the bracha over the song. Our duty to thank and praise and laud and glorify and raise up and beautify, bless, extol and adore him who made all these miracles for our fathers and us, who brought us from slavery into freedom, from sorrow to joy, from mourning to festivity, from darkness into light, going back to darkness and light, and from servitude into redemption. Let us say before him, hallelujah. And at that point, we start to recite Hallel. So this is the introduction to the Hallel. Now, some of us have a custom of saying Hallel in shul, actually. In the land of Israel, they will recite Hallel in shul after Ma'ariv on Erev Pesach, perhaps in order to spin out I originally thought in order to sort of lengthen out the shul service, so that when people got home to begin their Pesach meal, it was already dark. But my teacher Pardesh Shlomo Naeh said to me, no, Benedict, the original Hallel, the primary Hallel, is on Erev Pesach. We're going to say, so that the Mishnah says we're going to say Hallel, and that indeed is the primary time when Hallel was said. And we haven't learned the 9th chapter yet, but in closing, before we get on to the definition of the Hallel, which we're going to get onto in the next Mishnah, I just wanted to bring you the 3rd Mishnah from the 9th chapter, which talks about Hallel. Ma ben Pesach Rishon Lasheni. What's the difference between the first Pesach and the second one? The Mishnah here is talking about Pesach in Nisan and Pesach Sheni a month later, where which is the second chance to eat the Pesach offering for those who were unclean first time round. And the Mishnah there says, Harishon ta'un halel ba'achilato. The first Pesach has to have Hallel when it's eaten. You have to sing Hallel when you're eating the Pesach. Apparently not a month later. Hasheni eino ta'un Hallel ba'achilato. The second Pesach Sheni, doesn't require Hallel. Although, by the way, they both require Hallel when they're sacrificed. In other words, Hallel was recited in the temple while the Levi'im were slaughtering the Pesach animals, both for the first Pesach and the second Pesach. And of course, they're both eaten roasted with matzah and bitter herbs, and they both override Shabbat. But certainly, they both have Hallel when they're slaughtered, and the first one must have Hallel when it's being eaten. That's right the way back to the Mishnah.